Next up, we have touched on this topic some during our breakouts, but it's too important, too topical, too timely not to bring it to our main virtual stage. Social justice and racial equity, not only in our communities, but in the places where we work, and the private sector's role in creating meaningful and lasting change for the workforce of the future. Here with more is my friend and colleague, Sharon Epperson.
Justice begins where inequality ends. That is the motto of the Ford Foundation, one of the nation's largest foundations, and one that is working to fight against racial injustice. We're going to talk right now about a plan for action, a plan for corporate America in terms of ending racial inequality. What we're looking for now are some answers to what we need to be doing in the workplace, what corporations need to do, and how that will create better outcomes for their workforce. We're joined right now with the president of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker, to share his insights. Darren, thank you so much for being here and for helping us tackle this major issue and a major question that is facing so many corporations right now and facing our country.
Thank you, Sharon.
The role of the private sector in terms of social injustice and advancing social justice. What needs to happen? We have seen many proclamations from corporations about what they intend to do, but what should be done?
Well, I appreciate the many public statements and the commitments of philanthropic dollars and some of the initial commitments. But CEOs and corporations need to go deeper and to really create a new playbook. Because we've never seen a moment like this in American history, where the intersection of democracy and capitalism has, for far too many Americans, created a system of inequality, and too many of us feeling left out and left behind in an economy that seemingly values some of our skills and capabilities at a far greater rate than it does the average worker. And of course, we've always had that in our system, inequality. Any system of capitalism where incentives are important will have some form of inequality. However, the level of inequality that we see today is really not sustainable. So corporate America has a role as the engine of American capitalism to deliver on the potential of capitalism to create a system of shared prosperity.
The issue of systemic inequality, the issue of disrupting the systemic inequality is something that falls on business leaders as well as many other parts of this society. In terms of business leaders and their focus on disruption, that is a constant. How can they use the same tactics, some of the same tactics and tools that they are using to be disruptors in their industry to disrupt systemic inequality?
Well, to do the same things business leaders and entrepreneurs do when they want to achieve, to set targets, to create incentives to achieve those targets, and to hold themselves accountable when they do not. I believe that is the most important step a leader can take in business today.
One of the articles that you've written, so many, but one that you wrote in August for Time that really struck me were some of the key points that you said that corporations should take right now to address racial inequality, to make a difference. And you started with saying that the C-suite may need to be replaced. Replaced with whom? Who needs to be in the C-suite right now?
Well, I think we need diversity in the C-suite now. We know from the research that C-suites with more diversity outperform. And so this isn't a cry for political correctness. This is a business imperative. Corporations have to be diverse in order to compete, particularly public-facing companies. And so we're not asking companies to do anything out of the ordinary except apply the same principles that are applied in other domains of business to this issue of diversity. This is critical for the success of businesses in the future.
And hiring and advancing people of color, hiring and advancing Black people in the workforce is also very important. I wonder how you tie that with the compensation. And so making sure it's not just making sure you have a diverse workforce, an inclusive workforce, but making sure that it is an equitable situation as well, particularly when it comes to compensation.
Well, the reality is that most American workers' wages have stagnated in the last 3 decades. That is a fact. However, the wages and compensation of people like me have gone up at a higher rate. What that has meant is that the gap between the average worker and the top management has grown. That gap has created, I think, some problems that are systemic. Now, for workers of color, Black and brown workers, it is very important that we too have opportunities for getting on that mobility escalator, for landing in the C-suite. And too often, the C-suite, the operating committee, the boardroom, barriers are placed. Expectations are put there that are not always reasonable. Cultural practices, what we think of as normative standards, are not always applied to workers of color, especially at the executive level, because the expectations often of executives is that they are hiring people who look like them, who remind them of themselves 20 or 30 years earlier in their career. And we need to move out of that mindset.
I want to delve into an issue that may seem somewhat controversial to some, but looking at some of the issues that have held back many people of color, many Black and brown people who want to advance in the workforce, and that is having had some criminal record, having had some involvement with law enforcement, just because of the color of their skin often, not necessarily because they are guilty of a crime. There's something that you've suggested in terms of looking at the Fair Chance Housing Initiative as an initiative that corporations need to really understand. Can you explain what that is and explain your view on someone with a criminal record in the workplace? What should corporations be looking at or business leaders be looking at as they're trying to figure out if these are people that they want to bring into their corporations and their companies?
Well, first of all, Sharon, we have to realize that we have a criminal justice system that has racial bias embedded in it. That's not a political statement. That's not anecdote. People like Brian Stevenson, Michelle Alexander, Dr. Phil Goff have demonstrated empirically the ways in which Black and brown Americans are treated differently in that system. So it should not come as a surprise that we have as many as 1/3 African-American men under the age of 40 with some engagement in that system, which basically renders them unable to find employment in the formal workforce. So what the Fair Chance Initiative is doing seeks to have employers first ban the box, as we call it, the box on employment applications that ask, do you have a criminal record? To ban that box, because that box means that candidates are automatically disqualified. Doesn't mean that you don't find that out as an employer. You do need to find that out as an employer, but it is not a mandatory way of disqualifying candidates. So when we put in place the systems that both make it possible for people to come into the formal workforce, it allows them to not be pushed into the informal economy. And we know what that means. Secondly, it allows us employers to help us solve a major challenge, which is employment for formerly incarcerated men and women. We know that the greatest barrier to their advancement upon leaving incarceration is employment. And we also know that those employers who have taken on employing formerly incarcerated men and women, such as the Ford Foundation, demonstrate very positive results. At the Ford Foundation, we have literally had one challenging employee out of the dozens we have hired, and that is a much better rate than what we have had with our regular workforce. So we have to look at work and opportunity for this population of people returning home.
Looking at work and opportunity for these people returning home is, of course, very important. But there may be some HR leaders, some business leaders watching this saying, we don't want to bring people into our organization that have a criminal record. Is it important to understand that often this record may not be an accurate reflection of what happened at the time or where that person is today? And so how do you implore and encourage employers to make sure that they are looking for a workforce that is ready for work today, not based on what may have happened in their lifetime as older teenagers or early 20-year-olds?
Exactly. I think what we find is that there is also disparate treatment in this regard as well, because there are many people who have had some engagement with the criminal system. It might have been for cocaine, or it might have been for a violation that happens to middle and upper income whites. Those violations are often overlooked, are often worked through so that those individuals can be employed. And what we are saying is, let us just be fair, and let us not judge people by their worst day, their worst act. None of us would wish that, but to have fairness, and it actually will be good for your company. It will be good for the morale, because people want to work for a company that has empathy, that understands that people can make mistakes, and that has some social dimension to their work as a corporation. This program that we have had at the Ford Foundation now for 5 years has been a morale booster for all of the foundation, because people feel as though our work is advancing a broader social objective.
One of the other suggestions that you have is to advocate for more social programs as a corporation. Are you advocating doing that as a charitable donation to a nonprofit organization? Or are you saying to do that as a public-private partnership with an organization, using perhaps almost a social program, social justice organization as a consultant on how to improve some of the inequalities within the workplace?
Yeah, I'm advocating for two things. One, for corporations to recognize that they are indeed social actors. Yes, they must be focused on EPS, but they also should be focused on CSR. And in order to do that, you do need to have a corporate philanthropy and a strategy, and to be as generous as you can. But more importantly, I believe corporations can play a role in helping solve social challenges. If you look right now in the midst of this pandemic, the biggest challenge that we have that will unlock the solutions we need will come from a corporation or a series of corporations who will develop vaccines. They will, in developing those vaccines, make it possible for us to unlock the solutions to so many other challenges that we see facing us that without a vaccine, we can address. So I believe if you look across many facets of life in our country and in the world, and many of the problems we want to solve, corporations can help contribute, can help provide solutions to some of those major social challenges.
What if a CEO says to you, this all sounds great, I do believe in it in spirit, but I answer to my shareholders. And I'm not sure if this is going to be able to be something that passes through that particular test. What kind of shareholder reforms need to take place so that it in fact does happen, and that the shareholders and all stakeholders buy into this?
Well, I think there are many CEOs who want to do the right thing, and yet they are in a system where the incentives and the structures and the standards and norms expect them, and in some ways disincent their taking bold, courageous action that is in the best interest of the long-term best interest of the company. So the things that we need to do is to move away from the obsession with quarterly guidance and the near term, and look at the long term, a year out, 2 years out. Understand strategy, unpack that strategy, and hold management accountable for that long-term strategy, recognizing that there will be bumps along the way. But I think a lot of CEOs who are really trying to do the right thing feel caught. They feel caught in a system that doesn't encourage courage. And when we have a system that does not encourage courage, we're going to see less risk-taking, we're going to see less innovation, less ingenuity, and ultimately it will be bad for corporations and our economy.
You've outlined, several really key initiatives that need to be taken. If people listen to Darren Walker and follow your playbook, where will we be in 5 years? What type of measurable change do you think we will see if these initiatives are put into action?
Well, I think we will see more of the big challenges that we have in our country solved, or we will see progress towards solutions. So, for example, we need to have leaders in our country right now at every level who are helping to unite us, to bring us together as a nation, as a people, to solve our big problems, whether they are climate change or inequality or healthcare or education. And the private sector has a critical role to play in that. So I would like to believe that 5 years from now, it will be possible to imagine an America where we have more shared prosperity, where we look, oddly enough, if it may sound odd, like Canada, because the reality today, Sharon, is that if you want American-style prosperity and mobility, you should move to Canada, because the Canadians are delivering on mobility and shared prosperity at a much higher rate than we are here in the United States. So we need to get back to the business of having an economy that delivers opportunity, shared prosperity, and long-term security for American workers.
That sounds like a plan for action and a plan of action that everyone should be paying close attention to and following right now, Darren Walker. Thank you so much for joining us. Darren Walker with the Ford Foundation for the That Work Conference. We are happy to have you and look forward to having you back.
Thanks so much, Sharon.